Do you have piles of patterned paper and cardstock scraps and you want a way to use them that is simple, easy, dare I say fun? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So today I'm going to share what I would call like a class, because I'm really going to break things down, be very, very specific, and it all is kind of wrapped around one theme. I also am offering a coordinating workbook to go with it to really give you some structured step-by-step directions. So we'll talk about that as well. But today's class is all about taking patterned paper scraps, cutting them to a uniform size, and then making 5 different cards from those handful of scraps. So we're going to keep it really, really simple. We're going to start with 1.5 inch square scraps. So I already have mine cut, but you can go into your scrap pile and find some patterned paper that is, scraps, and cut it to 1.5 inch squares. You're going to need 4 1.5 inch squares for each of the cards. So I would recommend finding patterned paper that is either large enough to get 4 squares out of it, or you can find some coordinating pattern papers and find 4 squares in all. It doesn't need to match. We'll see that in the class, but I am going to be using matching ones. I don't really have scraps. As those of you who are familiar with my channel, my whole thing is no scrap card making, so I always cut pattern paper in a way that doesn't leave scraps, and I can show you how to cut these 1.5 inch squares such that you don't leave pattern paper scraps as well. So in the workbook, I show you that a 6x6 piece of paper can be evenly cut into 1.5 inch squares, and then that means also a 12x12 paper could be. So, but you just need to create the 5 cards I'm going to show you today, the 5 different ideas. We're going to need 20 pieces of 1.5 inch square patterned paper scraps. We're going to want cardstock mats to go with these. You don't absolutely need these. These are totally up to you, but I like the way that it gives it a little bit more presence because these are kind of simple cards. There's some white space on them. So I have 20 1 3/4 by 1 3/4 inch cardstock scraps as well. Now, if you do need to cut these out of an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of colored cardstock, like you don't have the scraps for it, you can get all the pieces you need from one 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock. It will leave scraps, but you just need the one piece. And so we need 20 of each. We also are going to need 5 card bases because we're going to make 5 cards today. You can cut these from 8.5 by 11 white cardstock or any color cardstock, and I will briefly show you how to make that. You're going to need some adhesive to glue everything down. You're going to need a pair of scissors and a paper trimmer. The scissors might be optional, but I do like always mentioning it so that when I go to use them later in the class, I don't feel bad that I didn't say it in the supply list. And then there are some optional supplies. If you're making your card bases, you might find it helpful to have a scoring board and scoring tool. Often a scoring board comes with a scoring tool, but I've lost mine. And you're also, I would consider it an essential supply. Ephemera, something to decorate your cards. So you could leave them plain pattern paper, just put a sentiment on them or something like that, but I'm gonna show it with ephemera today. This could be stickers. This could be something that you've printed from Creative Fabrica. You could be using the card toppers I sell in my Etsy shop. You could be stamping and coloring your own images. Whatever you like to use for decorating your cards. And then another optional thing would be something like these trays, because I'm going to use them to help me kind of keep my pieces sorted. You can use trays that are large enough to hold your A2 size cards, smaller trays. You can use box lids, envelopes, whatever you have on hand if you need to keep things organized throughout the process. And then for adding sentiments, I'm going to use a stamp set. So I'm going to stamp some sentiments on some extra cardstock. So I need some extra white cardstock. I need a stamp block, and an ink pad, but you could say get some stickers for sentiments. You could leave sentiments off. You could die cut sentiments, whatever works for you. But those are the things that we need. Just to briefly talk about the workbook, if you were to get the workbook to go alongside it, it would tell you all of these things. This is sort of a prototype of the workbook, so it might look a little different in the end, but it has like a supply list. It has directions, step by step. Some of those pictures need to be fixed for the final draft, but it will have step-by-step directions, and it will have all of the card sketches that we are using. So here's all of the card sketches, and then it's broken down with a card sketch, picture of the card. We'll go through all of these one by one in the class. And of course that cutting template I showed you earlier that shows you how to cut the 6x6 pattern paper to make the squares if you need it. So now we're ready to get started. If you've been card making long enough to have a big old pile of scraps, you might already know how to make your own A2 size cards, and I have a video on it here on my channel. But just briefly, we're gonna take an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock. Your card size might differ. I do believe these will work with A6 cards, so if you're outside the US and your card size is a little different, it's a little like thinner and taller, it should work fine. So we're gonna cut it to 5.5. I will say I haven't officially tested it. I have done that in the past. And then when you cut it in half, so it's 5.5 by 8.5, you're just gonna fold that in half again. And it can be as simple as just turning it over and meeting the edges like you might have done, you know, back in grade school. Use your finger to kind of press it down, or you might find it helpful to take that scoring board and run your scoring tool across it to create a card. Here, my scoring board has the A2 mark, but it is 4 1/4, so you kind of you would score at 4 1/4, and then you could use the bone folder to press it down. If you need some sentiments, I said take 3 pieces of white cardstock, and I only made 5 card bases, so I could take the extra, cut them into strips, and stamp my sentiments. But you can be stamping this on scraps of white cardstock as well. And I will just give myself something that coordinates with all of the paper. So I picked a dark blue to coordinate as my cardstock. So I'm gonna stamp my sentiment in the same dark blue, and I'm gonna know, because all of my card bases are white and all of my cardstock mats are dark blue, that these sentiments will match all of my cards. So part of what makes this so easy, fast, and potentially fun to do is all the cards need the same exact supplies. So I'm gonna need a card base for each one. If I had bigger trays, I could put the card base in them. There are larger trays available that I'm using these from scrapbook.com, and they do have bigger ones, but to kind of keep it more friendly for the size of what fits on the screen and that kind of thing, I'm just gonna use these smaller ones and know that I'll just grab a card base. So I can take 4 pieces of coordinating scrap and put it in each of these containers. I can take 4 pieces of coordinating cardstock and also put it in each container. I can, if I want, at this point, I could pick out a single piece of ephemera for each one and just say, hey, I'm just deciding to use the cupcake sticker for this or that one. But you don't have to. And also, if you know you're just gonna use this, like if you've stamped out the sentiments the way I did, you can just even put 1 sentiment in each one. And then that way, when it comes time to work on a card, you have all of your supplies gathered. Oh, I forgot the cardstock for these ones. Now, the other thing I might also suggest is, rather than sorting it all now, would be to glue all of the pattern to paper onto their cardstock scraps and then sort them. However you want to do it might depend on how it's best to keep it efficient for you. So now's the part of the class where I'm going to walk you through each of the 5 card ideas one by one. So I'm going to show you the sketch off here to the side. It has the example card if you're getting the workbook, but you can absolutely just draw this sketch. And I do want to point out this card sketch and that template where it shows you how to cut it. That is basically 6x6 paper busting template for A2 size cards number 33, I believe. And it'll be linked in the video description. So you can get this and this as paper busting template number 33, and that's free. But I had some other ideas for what to do with these size squares. And so rather than trying to like tack on 4 or 5 sketches to one template, I decided that I would just put all 5 of them together in this workbook for you. But you can, you could even print that particular template and sketch side by side and draw in the other ideas. Because again, this is, if you think the workbook is helpful, great. Please go ahead and purchase from the Etsy shop. But I'm trying to make sure that anyone can feel like they can do this successfully without the workbook. So and I also just want to be clear, if some of you are going like, this looks awfully familiar. Absolutely it is. Okay, so going forward, I am going to assume that you have glued your patterned paper to your cardstock. I'm not going to show that step every time. If you're trying to like follow along, you may want to pause the video and go ahead and add or to tape those together. So we can put the adhesive on the back of each of our squares and assemble them according to the sketch. You use whatever your preferred adhesive is. I find tape runner kind of nice because I could put adhesive on all of these and then tape them all down in a row, but liquid glue will absolutely do the trick. And this one's a simple grid pattern. It leaves a fair amount of room on the bottom, and that can be actually a great space to put an embellishment. It could be if you have like a larger sentiment that you want to add. Like I said, I have some of these stickers that coordinate with this collection that I'm using, and I liked the idea of like embracing the square. So this one would be really cute, and I like that it wouldn't explicitly be a birthday sentiment, but because I kind of am like, well, if I did this, then I already have a sentiment, then this place, like this space is kind of blank, and if I put a birthday sentiment, I don't know. So I decided to pick something that didn't have a sentiment, but I liked the square on square on square idea. So I picked this particular sticker. These stickers are kind of thin. I'm trying to remember if I put a cardstock. I think I put a cardstock backing on them because they are kind of thin. I didn't realize that when I bought them. I thought they were made of cardstock, not just paper. You could peel the sheet off, and I'm gonna have to not do this for every single one because I'm gonna struggle to peel off a backer sheet when I'm on camera. Maybe I'll like pre-peel them, and then I can put my sentiment down. Now here, you kind of like, I could stamp my sentiment directly onto here instead of adding it. The couple of reasons it's kind of nice to add it is I can have a second shot at stamping it. If I don't stamp it very well, I can, stamp an additional one. I can add some interest by, I could have stamped this on a piece of colored cardstock instead of on white. But I did do white for simplicity's sake here, so that's what we're going to add. But just some ideas, trying to throw in some design tips beyond just these sketch ideas. And then we have our first card sketch A. We're here at card sketch B. Again, paper is already attached. We just need to add some adhesive to the back of all of these. And there's actually going to be a little bit of cutting. We're going to turn one of these squares into a triangle to add this little bit of interest here at the top and bottom. So I want to take one where I actually did a good job of lining up the corners. I don't always do that. And you could use your paper trimmer. That would probably be a bit more accurate, but a pair of scissors will also do. And we're going to cut that triangle in half on the diagonal. Or should I cut that square in half on the diagonal to create 2 triangles, and put one here at the top and at the bottom of the card. Then this particular sketch would be helpful if your paper is non-directional, because instead of it being a clear top and bottom, you are turning it to a diagonal. Most of the other should work. I'm trying to think like in my head, what do all the sketches look like? Yes, everything else will work with directional patterned paper. So, but this one is something you want to keep in mind. Okay, I am noticing that I didn't quite give myself enough room from the edge. So the other nice thing about the dry adhesive, the tape runner, is they're usually a little bit easier to pick up because like once glue is dry, it typically is will rip your paper when you lift it up. But I'm using a scrapbook.com tape runner here. Most tape runners, especially if I haven't like pushed it down really, really hard, I can lift up without destroying things. So I can use that to adjust things and not have that one little piece hanging over the edge there. Okay. And then this time I want my embellishment to kind of interact with the scene here. I picked this large present here. And then my sentiment, oh, I have it right here. I'm trying to stay organized. I'm again gonna do the little banner. I think it adds some interest. Another banner option, what I did on the first one was just cut it at an angle. You can also cut a banner by cutting down the center and then starting at the corners, cut in towards the top of that previous cut you made, and that creates a slightly different banner. So just some different options there. And then we'll trim off this side as well. And we can adhere those down as well. Another thing you could do to add a little interest is to pop up your sentiment and embellishment. And that is also a great way to use some extra cardstock. So I will take like 2 pieces of scrap cardstock and glue them together, and then I will adhere that behind things and kind of create what I call fake foam tape. So since this, part of the theme of this is using up some scraps, that's another way to use up cardstock scraps. All right, moving on to sketch 3 of 5, or sketch C, sorry. And then I'm going to, this one is a lot like sketch A, and I mean they're all going to be a lot like each other because they're using the same 4 shapes, but something as simple as taking that grid and shifting it down changes the way the card looks. It's instead of having like this, very geometric look, we've also now spread it across the card. So there's less white space. I mean, technically there's the same amount of space because we're not covering any more of the card. It's just broken up and spread out differently. And it's interesting how those simple things can change sort of the overall look of the card. It doesn't feel like, oh, there's this big gap like there kind of was in the first card. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, that larger gap. It's interesting how those small changes can mix things up. And so here I'm going to be using this person holding the balloons, and I'm gonna have it, since it's just their arm and the balloons, I'm gonna just have it so that it looks like they're coming from off the edge of the card a little bit, and that's why perhaps you only see an arm. And then we'll go again with a simple banner. You can choose whichever of the 2 banner styles that you like, or of course you could be using something completely different. And a lot of times I think about like how my elements interact and overlap with each other. So here, I'm not sure that I really want my sentiment completely hanging off into the white space. I think I'd kind of like it if there was a little bit of the blue underneath it, but I don't want it also, I didn't think of a good way to have it overlap with the balloons. You could do something like that if you really like them to overlap and interact with each other, but I do think that in general, if you kind of feel like, why does it when I put my embellishments down look like they're just kind of random, and then other people it feels like they're random, but like I like the way it looks better. There's certain things you can take into account, like the way that the elements kind of interact with each other, they layer on top of each other. Are they doing things like leaving a little bit of, space around things? Again, like putting the arm up against the edge, whereas if I had it kind of like floating in space like this, that might look not quite as nice. So I like to talk about these different design decisions because when I first started crafting, I kind of felt that way too, where I was like, I feel like they're not doing something all that different, but I like the way theirs looks better. And so listening to people explain their design process helped me. Let's take a look at card sketch D, which is 4 of 5. And this time again, in some ways you can really see that similarity. You know, the last sketch we just had these side by side, and now we've kind of just shifted things over a little bit, and it's again given us a different look. So instead of taking advantage of the idea of like there being space between things and that orderliness of lining things up, now we have the interest of them interacting with each other. And so we're doing a staggered look. We're starting in the top corner, and then the second one we're going to place is this this one here. So that's also on the bottom layer. These two are the bottom of the card. So we've shifted this over a little bit, and then we're going to come back to this square that's the second one down, but actually is layered on top of these two. So I just kind of wanted to point that out because the order in which you lay those down matters a little bit if you're trying to mimic the sketch exactly. And then finally, this last square is laying on top of the third square. And so when you have a thicker cardstock layer on top of another cardstock layer, sometimes this little piece will kind of like bump up over the other one. You can put a little cardstock behind there to kind of prop it up so it looks like it's laying really flat on the card, if that's something that's important to you. Certainly, because I'm using these, which are paper stickers, I'll probably put some cardstock behind this paper sticker before adding it to the card, just because there are so many layers of cardstock underneath this sticker that it would look like it was kind of bumping over everything, and you see all those lumps and bumps in the paper sticker. It's not as obvious when you have like a cardstock layer, but just something I want to point out, think about for your card. And again, adding our white sentiment here, thinking about how it interacts with the things around it, leaving some of the color to show. You can decide, you know, do you want to have it to interact with your sticker? I didn't quite like that because I felt like then when I bunched up all my embellishments, that there was because there's quite a bit of white space on this card. And I did want to let you know, if you are the kind of person who's like, I don't really like a lot of white space on my cards, but I do like this idea of no scrap card making, etc. I do have a video where I talk about different things you could do in the background to make it feel less like there's just a bunch of blank space on your cards. All right, and we are on to our final sketch. So we've taken the same 4 1.5-inch squares, and we have turned them into 5 different card designs. As you can see, you know, some of them stand out to be a little bit more different than others. But this time we're coming back to that idea of orderliness and lining things up again. But this time we're making one long row here on the side. And what I'm going to do to be successful with that is I'm going to put the top and bottom down. You could use your grid mat to help you make sure things are lined up really well. And then I'm going to center. See, and I didn't line them up very well. I really should have taken advantage of my grid mat. And then you're going to take this middle one and make sure it's equidistant from the top and bottom. So rather than guessing about that space, noticing it there, I think will be easier. Okay, and then this final square is going to come off to the side and sort of start drawing your attention away from this line. And then I chose this cupcake because there's like a little cat hair here that's driving me nuts. Don't worry, I'll get that. Before I finish the card off, I'll pull it out from underneath there or fix it up. Anyway, so I picked this embellishment because I wanted it to like mimic the length of the card. So if I picked something kind of short like this, first off, it might kind of draw your attention in the opposite direction, but also it doesn't reinforce that this card has a long element to it, or something like this square would, again, it just kind of like winds up taking up an awkward amount of space. So these are just, again, design decisions I like to think about. So I'll put that there. I'll cut an interesting banner. You can do, this time I decided to do both sides of the sentiment as a banner because I didn't really have any like flat edge I wanted it to line up against, and because this particular embellishment is like more on the solid side, I thought it would be nice to let it interact. And so here I've kind of got my sentiment and embellishment combo touching every single one of my squares, really tying it and pulling all the attention to the center here. I briefly wanted to follow up on the idea of could you do these with A6 cards? A lot of my 6x6 paper busting templates do work with A6 cards. This class, they absolutely work with A6 cards. I felt like I barely had to change the sketches. We'll talk about that very, very briefly, but as you can see, an A6 card, and many of you, if you work with A6 cards, know this, it's a little bit longer and just a tiny bit wider. So often you can, make some very quick, if any, changes needed at all. So here I have card sketch A. As you can see, it basically looks the same. There's like a little bit more room at the bottom. Card sketch B, I had to kind of put a little bit more room between things, like between the squares, but again, basically the same. Card sketch C, you probably don't even notice a difference. Again, it is that little bit more space on the top and bottom. Same thing here with C. And then this is the one I think like the change is most noticeable with card sketch E here, because there's a little bit more space in between the squares. And if you like the little bit more condensed look, what I would say is instead of putting the squares touching the top and bottom, because it kind of barely fit with an A2 card, you could instead actually leave a little bit of border on the top and bottom, and that might be something that I would do differently for an A6 card, but I felt like you didn't even need to change the sketches if you didn't want to make these work. So I just wanted to follow up on that for anyone outside the US. These card sketches work for you as well. I hope you've enjoyed creating with your scraps. I hope these feel like ideas that you can use over and over again for different seasons, and that having multiple ideas, multiple sketches, makes it feel like you're not just creating the same card over and over again. I'm going to leave links to all sorts of resources that I mentioned throughout the videos, like the sketch that this idea originated from, so you can download that for free, to what to do with the white space in the background if you would like less of that, and of course to the workbook in the Etsy shop. So it'll come with the supply lists, detailed directions so that you can follow through without having to rewatch the video. Again, there might be some edits before the final version. It'll come with the cutting template that shows you how to cut this from 6x6 paper, and you could also use it for 12x12 paper or use your scraps. It'll show you each card sketch and an example of the completed card for your reference if you prefer to just kind of have that. And then at the back, also one page, which is all the card sketches for your reference. There's a couple other pages with writing on it and that kind of thing in there, but I just kind of want to show you the main features of the workbook in case that's something that's helpful to you. If you found this class helpful, here's another video where you will find ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with the share to your crafty community. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for the links mentioned. See you in the next video.